So when I was 15 and I sat my mother down at the kitchen table, I knew exactly what she thought I was going to tell her. I said, "Mommy, I got to tell you something." She said, "Oh, shit."
I came across Tiq Milan by way of a story he told at the Moth Story Hour back in 2022. It's titled Miss Mary, and the description of it says, Tiq Milan keeps an important secret from his mother.
I said, wait a minute. I'm not pregnant. I'm gay.
That secret led to an incredibly honest, raw, and beautiful exploration of his fears of losing his mother's love and acceptance. You should check it out. But it was honestly the first line of the whole story that floored me. Tiq starts Miss Mary with this line.
I was my mother's fourth daughter.
Years after coming out to his mother as a lesbian, Tiq would come out to her as a trans man in his early 20s, ahead of undergoing chest reconstruction surgery.
I think the moment when I started to understand that I was a trans man was when I was working at a bar in New York City. It was in my early 20s, a lesbian bar called Meow Mix. This guy walks in and he starts throwing these flyers on the table, right? I look at the flyer and it's a picture of him and he has his arms crossed around his chest. And it says, Tata Tatas, a top surgery fundraiser for this guy. I had never met a trans man before that moment. It was like it clicked. I was like, oh shit, that's what this is. That's who I am.
I wanted to talk with Tiq because since his transition and since that story he told at the Moth, his communication around the non-monolithic trans person has only gotten clearer. His megaphone has only gotten louder. And his advocacy for the LGBTQ plus community has become not only his profession, but his calling.
I'm a leadership and development strategist. I've also been a media strategist. I'm a LGBT advocate and activist. And I've been doing that work for about 2 decades now, really working towards creating a culture and a life that looks like love and acceptance for trans people. And I've gotten to do that in myriad ways, through youth work, through media work, through leadership, and also through the church. A man of the people trying to make things a little better, I think.
I also want to talk to Tiq because selfishly, admittedly, I want to learn how to talk to Tiq or someone like him. And I'm not talking person to person, man to woman, or cis woman to trans man. I want to talk to him as someone who works in the media, who has a job to do when it comes to platforming these necessary conversations.
I think that the media is missing its mark on covering these issues, particularly when it comes to the trans issue of trans folks in athletics, trans folks in bathrooms. Really get it under why all of a sudden the people who are less than 2% of the population on the whole planet, we talk about the margins of the margins, there are more redheaded people in the world than there are transgender people as far as we know. How did this become the cause du jour? How did we become the boogeyman of everything? Like, I think what's happening, the journalists are asking the wrong questions.
From Vermont Public, this is Homegoings, a show that invites you to eavesdrop on candid conversations with people who will challenge what you think you know. I'm Myra Flynn. Today, a conversation with trans rights activist Tiq Milan about his journey towards living in the body he was meant to live in, and how protection for him and other members of the queer community means holding the media accountable. This is Homegoings. We're a proud member of the NPR network. Welcome home. I came to you by way of this piece you did with the Moth, and I just found it to just be pretty breathtakingly beautiful, and according to the comment section, so did a lot of people, so I'm not alone in that feeling. I hope you're feeling proud of that, because it's nice when the internet leads me to you because of something like that. Can you tell us a story of how you found yourself and you came into your own identity as a trans man today? Yeah.
Well, I think oftentimes people think that trans folks, that we're a monolith, that we all understand ourselves to be trans at a very, very young age. And I didn't. I don't, we talk about the late 80s, early 90s when I'm a little kid, and, I have a mother who's a nurse and a dad who's a mechanic in Buffalo. We're just regular, working class, blue collar people. this idea of transness wasn't even a reality, So it wasn't even something that I thought was possible or anybody in my family thought was possible. But I knew that I liked what the boys liked. When I was 7, my
Yeah.
mother bought me this strawberry shortcake bicycle.
Oh, it was strawberry shortcake. Yeah. Okay.
Strawberry shortcake bike, and it had the pink, and it was, the pink.
Very girly.
Super girly.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew I wasn't riding that bicycle. I saw it. I was like, ain't no way. There ain't no way in hell I'm riding this bike up and down the street in front of my friends. I can't. But something in my soul, I realized I can't do it. And so I got my dad. I'm like, Daddy, Mommy bought me the wrong bike. And he took it back and he got me a boy bike. It was like no questions asked. He got me a black bike that had the orange lightning stripe on it, and he put the noisemakers on the spokes, and it had the hard seat that hurt your butt, and it had the straight bar, not the skinny bar. Man, listen, Pops hooked me up. And
he knew. Yeah.
I didn't know, but I just knew me and that bike weren't aligned.
Y'all were not going to be friends. Yeah. And also just like strawberry shortcake and like Rainbow Bright, just some of these characters that were from that time, the 80s, right? Just so girly, just so extra. And My Little Pony, all of them, so extra, so girly. The Care Bears, yes. I feel like as, a femme-identifying kid, I was also, that would have not been my bike of choice. So
I like Transformers and Matchbox cars and Nintendo. Mm-hmm. So back then it was just, Tiq and Tomboy, so whatever. But, I think that the thing that really allowed me to come into my own, particularly reflecting on my childhood, is that my parents always just allowed me to be me. They never tried to force me into anything. I was never chastised or shamed because I liked boy clothes, because I liked more masculine things. So I think I was just, at the very beginning, I was just given a foundation to just allow myself to be myself. But I think the moment when I started to understand that I was a trans man was when I was working at a bar in New York City. It was in my early 20s, a lesbian bar called Meow Mix. Shout out to Meow Mix, Laura East. And this guy walks in. And he starts throwing these flyers on the table, right? And he's like, throwing a party here next week. Put the flyers out. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So he puts the flyers out. I look at the flyer, and it's a picture of him, and he has his arms crossed around his chest, and it says "Tata Tatas." A top surgery fundraiser for this guy. I had never met a trans man before that moment, and so when I met him and I saw the flyer, it was like it clicked. I was like, oh shit, that's what this is. That's who I am. Because I was progressively becoming more uncomfortable with people seeing me and calling me she and recognizing me as a woman in the world. It just didn't feel good. It wasn't like I hated myself, but just, it didn't feel, there was a deep incongruence. There was a misalignment with what people perceive my reality is and what I perceive my reality is.
That's amazing. Yeah. You were a media writer for the documentary Disclosure, right? That's out on Netflix.
We've been around since there was footage. You just have to look for us.
Can we all just talk about D.W. Griffith for a minute? Not only is he incredibly racist, but he turned gender non-conforming people into the joke.
So it's like you can't have queer trans people and blackness in the same space at the same time. So what's it say about my queer trans black ass? Yeah, and I did help with some of the writing, some of the research, and I executive produced another documentary, The Aggressives, Part 2, which is out on Showtime. So shout out to The Aggressives. Check us out.
I love it. There was somebody who said something really poignant about representation in Disclosure that really stood out to me, which was in order for me to be in this world, I have to see myself in this world first. And so when you're talking about that flyer, is that kind of what happened for you, where you were just like, oh, I finally see myself represented, and you had never even seen a photo with somebody having top surgery before previous?
I didn't know that it was possible to come into this world as a girl and leave this world as a man. I didn't know that that was a thing, that there were people like me, that there were people who were differently gendered like me. And so, yeah, representation is important because you want to see yourself reflected. But I think more importantly, it's also making sure that we have models of possibility for our future, particularly for those of us who sit at the intersections of marginalized identities, who often aren't centered. Our representation, our love, how we look, how we live, how we think, none of those things are ever centered. So it is important that we see that representation so that we can feel possible and lean into the possibility of the uniqueness of ourselves.
I'm curious how it felt to be visible in all of these different ways. To identify as a lesbian, to identify as a trans man. I mean, these are some swings in identity that not a lot of people get to experience. Like, how did that feel to you?
That's true. It felt, I guess, it feels fine. I think that even though it has been hard, being a trans person is not easy, and and having to deal with people's ignorances and things like that, it can be hard. However, at the same time, I have had a unique experience of being able to live in this world at different points on the gender spectrum and having been treated differently and understanding like what that looks like to be treated differently when I was like young, when I was very feminine in my teenage years. So I went to all girl private schools. So I was very feminine. I was a model, so I had to do all that. And then being a tomboy as a little kid and then being this butch lesbian. And here, I think what I've taken away from all these experiences is I've learned how people interact with you differently at these different spaces in life, particularly in the context of how you present feminine or masculine or man or woman. There's a difference in how people approach you, a different energy. Like the love and the relationships I've built throughout my life, how like the sisterhood that I created, prior to transition is something that's been so important to who I am now as a man. But I don't get to do that anymore because I'm not that, and I shouldn't be able to. So I think, people deserve exclusive spaces when you particularly marginalized groups. So that's not the space for me anymore. But, the vulnerability and the capacity to love and hold space for vulnerability and hold space for complex emotions within a complex and within a platonic relationship, and to see people with their wholeness is something that I learned from the women in my life, And now, and I've learned a lot from the men in my life now, being, I spent half of this life as a woman and half as the man that I am. Of transition, I was 22.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm in my 40s now. So really it was like a whole, we're split in half, So the advantage is that I've learned a lot about the human capacity and the human complexity because I've been a part of it. And I think I know how to hold a lot of space for people who are different.
Right.
And hold a lot of space to allow myself to be a man, be a masculine person in this world, and still have the capacity for vulnerability and love. I don't really shy away from my feelings too much. Not to say that I'm perfect or I'm some kind of unicorn, because I'm not.
No,
I'm not. I just think
but
that
it does sound superhuman. It sounds like it's only enhanced like your humanity writ large to be able to have had both experiences.
I think so. Here's the thing. I think that me as a trans person has allowed me to expand my perspective and my love and empathy for how people show up in this world differently, right? But you don't have to be a transgender person to have that experience of expansiveness of your empathy and your love for other people. You just have to be intentional about wanting to change, right? To be wanting to change for your betterment, for you to be better. And for me, the change was I had to transition in order for me to be my most idealized self, for me to feel closer to God spiritually, for me to feel like I was aligned with who I am in this world. That's the thing. And I think we all can do it. That space of expansiveness and empathy doesn't just belong to those of us on the margins. We all have an obligation to do it.
There doesn't seem to be equal representation of transmasculine people in media, depicted in media and film and television, as there is in transfeminine. Mm-hmm. When there is that transmasculine person depicted, I tend to see them being like shamed for leaving their femininity behind, or that in order to turn masculine, you have to get square with like anti-feminism. I think about Max and the L Word, right? When Max transitioned and was just all of a sudden this like raging, asshole character all of a sudden because he was on testosterone. It was such a cartoon version of a human being. But I do remember like this scene of him also being like shamed for like, why would you want to become a man? You're leaving behind the most beautiful thing, which is to be a woman. And I just wondered, were you ever shamed in this way? Did you ever experience anything like that?
That's, first, can I just say, stuff like that is just so basic. It's just, I hate it.
Yes, you can say. Yes, please do.
It's just not that, it's not that simple. I can't say that I was shamed. Not really. But I can say that at the beginning, because remember, this is like the early on. So this is like 2004, 05. Trans people weren't as visible as we are. I don't think there was the same like nuanced and like understandings of us, right?
Right.
and like lesbian community, women's community can be really like protective of itself and insular,
Mm.
And so I do feel like I wasn't necessarily shamed, but I do feel like there were people in my life who felt like there was a betrayal,
Mm.
you know. But it
Yeah.
was nobody ever like shamed me to my face. Nobody ever questioned me. Nobody ever said that to me. I think there's
Right.
enough like love and respect for me, and amongst each other. But I'm sure there were probably some conversations when I wasn't around. But there definitely was this aspect of folks are being like betrayed, as if being a woman wasn't good enough, and it has nothing to do with that. Like being a woman
Right.
is good for women. I'm not a woman. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? It worked for me. And
Right.
that's just what it is. It's not as basic of a choice as this thing is better because it's inherently better because I'm drinking like the patriarchal Kool-Aid. It's like, no, this
Right.
thing is better because this is aligned with my spirit, with who I am. And it doesn't take away from who I was or take away from who other people are. I just had to get right with me, and I
Mm-hmm.
think, I've had those conversations without it having to be without the pretext of the question. So I think
Yeah.
I've tried to answer that for people before they could even go there with me.
You're so clear-eyed. Like, just on this topic, or I'd imagine anything. I'd imagine if I asked you, like, what kind of socks are your favorite socks? You'd be like very clear-eyed in your response. Have you always been this way?
I think so. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. I try to, I don't know if I've always been this way. Let me not lie.
Okay. Don't lie, please.
Let me not. Don't get me to lying up here, okay?
Okay.
I'll be honest though. I think in the last couple of years, as I've gotten older, as I started therapy, going to therapy has been really super helpful. I think, and just the wisdom and the passions of time. I've dealt with a lot of loss and hardship and trauma in my life. Despite having like beautiful community relationships, I've lost a lot. I've grieved a lot. And I think once you've gone through a level of trauma and grief, you could come out on the other end of it sane and okay, and still like having a love for people in life. It does something to you that gives you some clarity, I think. And I think being able to go to therapy and really get under my emotions, really like excavate why I feel this way or why I behave the way I do, and giving myself some grace for that has also allowed me to be clearer with who I am and what my expectations of myself and my expectations of other people. So I think that clearness, yes, is the thing, but it's a real thing. It's not just I'm just a cool guy. No, I went through some shit. And I had to put in some work. And I had to put in some work intentionally so that I can be here and be clear and be okay.
Yeah, you've earned it. Can you tell me how you came to do this as your work?
I've always been a communicator. I think it's just the way I've operated in the world ever since I was a kid. I was class president. I used to do poems and shit in high school. Career-wise, throughout my life, that's kind of been the through line, whether I was doing like media strategy or working as a journalist or even like the development work that I do. And I've always been really focused on, advocating for my people, for LGBT people. The thing that I've learned about this work in all the ways that I've done it, the bottom line is like the storytelling, right? The bottom line is being able to tell people your experience in this life and who you are.
Mm.
Every last one of us has a story that somebody needs to hear. There's somebody or lots of somebodies in this world that need to hear about how you overcame what you overcame, about your challenges, about who you are, about the complexity of your human condition. So for me as a Black trans man who's also a father and who's also a Christian, who have all of these different identities, people don't think it's impossible for you to have all of those things and exist, but it is possible because here I am and let me tell you how. I don't have to be out as a trans person. I could walk in, nobody knows I'm trans outside the world. You know what I'm saying? I have, associates who don't know that I'm trans. My landlord doesn't know that I'm trans. You know what I'm saying? Like, people don't have to know. But
No.
I choose to really be open about it. I choose to tell my story, all the vulnerabilities, all the hard parts, and hopefully giving somebody like the hope and inspiration that they can continue to tell their stories.
Yeah, like high level communication, I think, is something that not everybody, excels in. And so if you can, you must and you shall. And it's really nice to see somebody who like owns like, no, I'm really good at communicating. So that's how I arrived here. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And you're saying like your landlord doesn't know that you're trans. Like it's nobody's business clearly, but also I'm assuming this is because you are passing like 100% as a Black man.
Yeah.
I guess like Black men are going through some shit in this country, as regarding their own tropes and stereotypes. Have you dealt with any of that along your journey?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, no one knows that I'm trans outside of like I always said, like I'm like queer famous. You know what I'm saying? So folks who are kind of like outside of like the queer bubble, the queer world, they don't know who I am and they don't care. So people do perceive me just as a everyday cisgender heterosexual Black man in the world, and so I have to deal with all that comes with that for sure.
Like cops and like what are we talking about?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I've got
harassment.
I've been harassed by cops 2 different occasions. Just ridiculous. I don't even want to get into it, but just like pull me out of the car, just regular shit. NYPD just doing what they do. But I will say there's not a whole lot of overtly awful or discriminatory or harmful things, right? But I do walk with that anxiety. I really do not mess with the police. I do not like the cops. I don't feel safe around them. I don't want to be around them. I don't want my loved ones being around them. I don't want to be anywhere near them. I don't want to live near them. I'm just being straight up. I'm just being 100%. They fearful because I know that they can take my life and justify it. And people are going to go out and they're going to protest and they'll give my family $500,000 in 3 years, but I'm dead and gone for nothing. And you're going to forget my name in 10 years. Like it to know that can happen to me gives me quite a bit of anxiety. You know what I'm saying? So I think I walk with that every day, but I walk with that anxiety, but it doesn't, it doesn't lead me. You know what I'm saying? It's something that's a part of me, but it's not in the driver's seat ever. That fearfulness isn't in the driver's seat ever, but it's there. It's totally there. But I think, what I try to do as a Black man in the world and the conversations I try to have with other Black men, particularly those who aren't trans or aren't gay, are to think about the expectations we have of ourselves in the context of our gender and our race. What do we expect from ourselves as men in the world and in our communities? And to think about those things and to live to those expectations. So yeah, experience it. It's like a yes and okay, like it is. Like I don't dwell on it. It is what it is. I just try to think about how to negotiate around it and be better about it, and to keep myself protected, and stay brave in the face of such violence.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a time when we had our baby. She was a newborn. I didn't want my husband going out to even get diapers because the streets were so heavy and so spicy and so riotous and so much was happening. And so, yeah, I think it's scary. Yeah. We made an episode called It's Scary. Yeah. We made an episode called Black Men, How Are You Doing? And it took forever to get these Black men to even give an answer. Until it was always like, well, God is good. And like, I keep praying and all of these things, except like answering the question, until finally, like one was just like, yeah, I'm scared.
Yeah. See, and I don't like that either. Particularly as a Christian, saying don't use God in prayer as a way to not be accountable to how you show up in the world. And don't use that as a way of not to face your fears. Cause you can pray all day. Listen, I'm a praying ass man. I pray every day. You know what I'm saying? But I could pray. That shit ain't going to save me. Praying is not going to save me from what's out here in this world, man. The prayer is supposed to give you the inner strength and the guidance to get through it, to give you the bravery to get through it. But you can't just pray the hate away. You can't just pray the injustice away. That's not how it works. You can't just keep praying for the clarity or strength. You gotta work towards that kind of thing.
To that note, we are right now seeing all sorts of like anti-trans legislation proposals really ramping up. And the media, like, us, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist, like has the opportunity to really shine a light on some of these things. Do you feel like the media is missing the mark, or is it doing its job?
Media is missing its mark, particularly when it comes to the trans issue of trans folks in athletics, trans folks in bathrooms. Really get it under why all of a sudden the people who are less than 2% of the population on the whole planet, we talk about the margins of the margins, there are more redheaded people in the world than there are transgender people as far as we know. How did this become the cause du jour? How did we become the boogeyman of everything? Like, I think what's happening, the journalists are asking the wrong questions. And they're asking the questions, again, that's going to keep this new cycle going. It's going to keep the conversation going. You know what I'm saying? It's going to rage bait people, but are you asking the right conversations to actually get to the truth of the matter? And the truth of the matter is that this is old bait and switch. This is, you look at these people over here. These people over here are so crazy, while everything that you have worked for and you think that you deserve in this world is being taken away by your government and by your and by these policies, right? Where we're seeing a shift towards, you know, in our culture that is going to definitely be to the detriment of certain people, particularly women. You know, you got rid of Roe versus Wade. So I'm not saying there's so many other things that are happening. And yeah, all this legislation is happening, but the legislation against trans people and treating 2% of the population as if we're the boogeymen, as if we just got here. You know, newsflash, folks, trans people have been here for thousands of years. You've been going to the bathroom next to trans people. We've been on your teams. We've been in your families. But the media machine has told us that this is what we need to be focusing on. And the problem is that when people really start to understand kind of the cultural trajectory that we're on, it always starts with the most marginalized of us first, to see how much cruelty we can tolerate. So if you could do this to Black trans women, okay. So now this, and now this, and now this, and before you know it, we're in a full on like fascist kind of like dictatorship. This is how it happens. I think journalists, not only do we create the culture, but we document the culture, but we also create it. But
on this note, because I mean, you would not be the first to say that so many of these issues being raised are a distraction from other things going on. But to also like to say yes, and also, you know, for less than 2% of the population in America being trans, the media has depicted trans folks over and over and over again. I think about Silence of the Lambs. I think about Alfred Hitchcock's bizarre obsession with all of these murderers being like these sick trans people, or not even trans, like who knows, right? Who knows what's happening, but there has to be something going on that's a man with a dress and some makeup and they're killing somebody. And so it has been a part of our culture and our media culture for a while. I guess what I want to ask you is like, how did it go from that, from trans identity going from that to something that like was already depicted pretty horribly, to being like at the center of our culture wars in a way, when there's so few trans folks in America?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on. First, you're absolutely right. The depiction of trans people in media has been awful, particularly when we talk about like our creative media. So like the depiction of the humanity of trans people has always been, like we said, killers, mentally ill, you name it. They did it to us, right? So now we're talking about like the news media. How is the news media supposed to be objective and supposed to reflect back like the experiences in the world? You know, that looks different too. So I think, how did we end up here? This is how I think that we ended up here.
Yeah.
2014, Katie Couric and Carmen Carrera were on the Katie Couric show in 2014. Laverne Cox and Carmen Carrera on Katie Couric. And Katie asked Carmen about her genitals.
Your private parts are different now, aren't they?
And Carmen's mortified, right? And kind of just like, I don't want to talk about that, right? So next segment, Laverne comes on. So Laverne comes on and is like, let's just go back to that with Carmen and let me tell you why that's messed up, right? So she's like, well, we focus on bodies. We don't get to focus on the lived reality of transgender people. And then she goes to talk about this young woman named Elon Nettles, who was murdered that summer because she was walking down the streets and got catcalled by a group of guys. When they realized that she was trans, they beat her into a coma and she died. Right? So Laverne brought that up and said that when we talk about bodies, we don't get to talk about the lived reality. And this is the lived reality of so many trans people. So that moment in media switched. Right after that, Laverne was on the cover of Time and she talked about the trans tipping point. Right. So now around this time, I was working at GLAAD and I was the senior strategist of trans media there and head of national trans news there. And so part of my job was to talk to people in media and say, hey, this is how you document the lived experience of trans people. Stop worrying about what's in between people's legs. Stop worrying about people's medical history. Let's have more nuanced conversations about their experience. So I was doing that work. Laverne was doing that work. And we started to see a shift in how the media was talking to us and about us. It started to get a little bit better. Started to see it getting right? So it's like this pendulum
Well,
started.
Katie Couric also like apologized, right? And like kind of owned her shit a little bit from that, right?
Yes. Oh my God, I left out the thing in the story. So that
great.
happened. And so then a couple weeks later, Katie Couric had me and Laverne and Chase Strangio, who's at the ACLU. Shout out to Chase. He does really great work over there, an attorney there. She had us back on the show, and we didn't talk about doctors. We didn't talk about bodies. We talked about the experience of trans people in the world. Those were the tipping points, right? I think when Laverne did that, and then Katie brought us back onto that show, her being on the cover of Time magazine, all the work that we were doing at GLAAD started to shift how the media started to talk about us. They started to talk about us in a more like holistic, full way. It definitely was not perfect, but it got better. And I think now that pendulum started to swing. We became, even though it was only 2% of us, we became a little bit too visible. We started to be humanized a little too much for some conservatives and for some folks, right? And I also think that there's a lot of like racism that goes into this too, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I think how we've arrived here with all of these policies is that as the cultural pendulum swings, you have folks who are a super minority of 2% who you were fine with just being in the dark and in the closet and being depicted in this way. But now we're in front of you saying we actually have a lived life. We actually have a human life and experience, and we're in your churches and we're in your schools. They're like, oh, we can't do this because we only expected these people to be a certain way. We expected these people just to be in the dark and to confirm our reality that they were monsters. And so we come out here and say, actually, we're not monsters. We're kind of just like you, right? Except for, we've been intentional about our experiences in gender that rubs people the wrong way. Our experiences tries to tell people that how they live and their experiences are wrong. Like us creating space for trans people doesn't take away any space from anybody else, culturally, socially, or otherwise.
Yeah,
and
that part. I mean, that's kind of what I was expecting us to dive into a little, is just like the self-loathing that we perhaps go through culturally anyway, like what it points out for ourselves, like too close to realizing how close we could be to navigating our own gender spectrum if we were ever allowed to, if religion ever allowed us to, if our families ever allowed us to, right?
Yeah, and I think that's another part of the religion part of it, because Christian nationalism is kind of at the helm of what's happening in this country. They're a huge part of why there's been this push, this anti-trans push, because it's antithetical to these traditional Christian values. Because these traditional Christian nationalist values are about patriarchy, it's about misogyny, it's really about controlling. A large part of it is about controlling women in the church, in society, and families. And so you're coming after trans people under this guise of protecting women and girls, but women and girls need to be protected from men like you. Trans women aren't bothering people. And it's about policing who can be a woman and who can't, and what a woman's supposed to be and what a woman isn't. Nobody's paying me any attention as a man. No one's trying to police me as a man. You know what I'm saying? The Christian nationalism and all of this religiosity, it really comes down to that. A lot of it is sexism and controlling women. You can't have these trans women out here. It doesn't compute to them. You know what I'm saying? That's why they're not paying attention to me. Trans men are just invisible. They don't even think about us when they're thinking about, you have to go to the bathroom of your assigned gender. Think about that again. There's an F on my birth certificate, my guy. Do you am I supposed to be in the women's locker room?
Right.
No, because it's not about me. You're trying to control women. And again, you start off with this minority. If you could do that here, then you could do that here, here, here.
Are you running for president next? What's happening?
Absolutely
You zoom out. I know. You're like, I do not want this job.
I got way too many skeletons in my closet. I got way too many open secrets.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I think what you're just saying, I feel akin to in some ways of just this hyper visibility and hyper invisibility as a Black woman in America. But with trans folks, I don't know, has it helped or harmed to become more hyper visible? Because the more visible you are, the more easily folks can enact violence on you as well. Is being in the media worth it at all?
Oh yeah, it's worth it. There are people always going to be violent. People are going to be assholes and awful, but I really believe in the goodness of humans. And I think the vast majority of us are good and are better and are curious, And that's the thing. Please folks don't get caught up in the hype of what we hear and the stories that people cherry pick to elevate. There are so many of us trans folks who come from beautiful families who love us, have friends who love us, you know what I'm saying, who are understood, who are safe. Many, many, many of us. Like, there's so many of us out there. It's not just that. And there are lots of cisgender heterosexual folks who aren't shitbags, who aren't terrible to trans women, who aren't terrible to trans people. Like, it's just, it's a yes and. It's a yes and. And me, I really want to do the work of creating more space to tell the stories on that side of it. Like, the places where we are experiencing love and experience joy, because like the more you put out here in the world, the more you're going to get out. You know, so if we keep experiencing and keep only talking about these divisive stories and these stories of resilience and heartbreak and betrayal, I mean, not to get too woo woo, not to say that's the only thing, but it does reverberate. It does come back. It becomes a place in which people operate from. It becomes a place in which people's mindset is. But what if we start to tell more stories of our joy and of our acceptance? That's why my story is so important. And you've seen it. People love you. You look through the comments of my story, you don't see not one bad comment. Not one. And that just really touched my heart so much, to be able to continue my mother's legacy and to touch so many different people with this story. And that's what people want more of. And you'll create more of that love. We can create more love in our lives when we start to focus on that good, or what makes us good, what connects us, not the shit that divides us. And with my story, what I found is the thing that connects us is that unconditional love. For me, my joy is the love that I have in my life that I've always had. That I did not have to fight for. Didn't have to make anybody love me. Why my people have always loved me. And what brings me joy is to see my community still together despite what's happening in this world, despite all the violence. For we're always going to love each other. We're always going to show up for each other. So, you know, I'm cool.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to continue to be a part of the Homegoings family, stay in touch at homegoings.co and subscribe to the Homegoings podcast wherever you listen. Take good care.